kill your mom or your sister?
No, but over the years, there were hints, but I guess they basically brushed it off. The hints were everywhere, but they're my family. They try to not look at it.
Location emergency. Yes, ma'am. Someone just knocked on my door. He's here at my door right now, and he wanted me to call 911 because he said he just murdered someone.
Okay, and he's there right now?
Yes, ma'am, and I'm scared.
And he said he murdered someone?
Yes.
Okay, is there any way that maybe I can speak to him?
Would you like to talk to 911 on the phone?
Hello?
Yeah, what's going on, sir?
Oh, as I said, I murdered someone, actually.
I'm fascinated by the more artistic ways of murder, the way they cut them open, just slice them to pieces. I mean, such care, such love.
Detective Romero, Detective Richard Garcia. Why are you here? What happened? Tell us what happened.
Well, has anybody gone to the house yet?
We know what we have, but we want to hear it from you.
Well, we have an idea. You don't want to look at that. Start at the beginning, man. What caused all this?
Very beginning, I asked my mother for permission to die, or rather kind of commit suicide. Because, well, that doesn't really matter why I wanted to kill myself.
Sure it does. It does.
I'm bored with life. I don't like life. I don't like people. I don't like living it, basically. There's really anything depressing about it. It just is what it is. And so I wrote the note.
So this note is titled Life Resignation Notice. Sorry for the bathroom mess, Mother. Good luck recovering from the shock, you too. When he says good luck recovering from the shock, he's taking pleasure in knowing the pain that his mother and his sister are going to experience. This makes the suicide not about him, but rather about the pain it's going to inflict on his family members. Until he decides it's a better idea and more hurtful to just kill them.
And then on a whim, actually, I turned it over, wrote a plan to kill both my mother and my sister.
We're looking at a murder plan. Kill mother with garrote. Afterwards, prepare to leave for good. Wait until nightfall. Go to sis' apartment and kill her, anyone else in the way. Leave for the Greyhound bus ASAP. Victory. So he shows a level of organization and planning and obsession.
Wrote a plan to kill both my mother and my sister. That's always been a thing of mine. I'm a bit of a pervert. And we used to have a gray cat named Claire. I strangled it, I drowned it, and then I cut it open, and you know the rest. You kind of get the rest.
In the sort of postscript of this letter, he says, I killed that stupid gray cat because I was bored one day, sorry. He's saying, oh, this is what I do when I'm bored. So imagine what I do when I'm not bored.
They're my family. Family looks past that kind of stuff, or they try to not look at it.
It's kind of funny how you never really know someone, not even your own son or brother.
How long have you had this thought you went?
It's around my preteens, actually.
you ever seek any kind of medical attention, psychological?
Nope, I never really seeked help, actually. I just accepted it as a part of me. I wasn't really ashamed of it. It just was what it was.
Shame, guilt, remorse deter us from doing terrible things because we don't want to feel guilty, we don't want to feel ashamed. Psychopaths generally will not experience these emotions, and so the shame that would generally come with doing something terrible or wanting to do something terrible just doesn't exist.
Kevin Davis talks about how he feels disconnected from everyone. He's aware of it, and it bothers him. Psychopaths would not be bothered that they're disconnected. In fact, they may not even notice that they're disconnected because they typically tend to be popular, because they're charming. Kevin Davis is not charming. He's not interested in impressing anybody. What he shows is disinterest. He's absolutely not interested in neither criticism nor praise. The police detectives don't know what to do with him. He is not that interested in what they have to say. He's detached. And detachment you see in psychopathy, but you also see it in some other kinds of manifestations. So he shows a lot of signs of being schizoid. It's a particular kind of personality disorder where you have no interest in relationships. You will not have close friends. You have no interest in any activities. You're not curious about anything. Nothing really turns you on. And perhaps he's both a little bit schizoid and a little bit psychopathic. One possibility is the mom noticed very early that he just wasn't fitting in. This was a child who was a loner, didn't socialize, was not interested in friendships.
His relationships really seemed to be limited to his mother and his sister, and so his aggression was thus targeted at them.
She said, basically, I'm a grown man, and what I do, she can't really stop me. She was distraught over it, of course. I mean,
Of course.
she had decided she was sick of this stuff, and she was going to go send me to live with my sister again.
We're looking at a text message from mom to the daughter. I could tell you so much that I've told him. Exactly what you just said. I'm just tired, not so much physical, both. Living with someone with a serious mental illness or who's very disturbed is draining, and she's a single mom. She's absolutely exhausted.
And so I kind of left off in a fury and just did it right then and there.
Okay, you did what?
Well, I tried to strangle her with a cord. A ripped cord from a video game console controller. That didn't work, huh?
What was your side of strangler?
She was sitting on the couch watching TV.
Okay.
Psychopaths do have lower impulse control, and it didn't seem like he really thought through this plan very well, evidenced by his initial attempt to kill her failing. He didn't really think through what was about to happen.
That didn't work out too well. She started screaming.
Right.
She grabbed the cord, so I raced back into her room, opened a drawer at the very bottom to the right. I pulled out a hammer. I went back in the living room, and, well, you kind of get the gist from there. And, she was out pretty quickly. Kind of tried to play dead at first.
How many times did you hit with a hammer in the living room?
At least 20. But then she was still alive. I dragged her into the room, as you clearly saw. I just knew it was time to act now or never.
I tell you what, give me your fantasy of killing a woman.
This is a little peculiar. I'm on camera. Okay,
He's never actually talked to anybody about these things. So there may be a hesitation in, oh, actually, is it okay that I'm on camera? No, I don't actually care. I can't wait to talk about it.
maybe dressing up in a a nice suit, sneaking into her house, disabling her boyfriend. You know, yeah, I'd bring a pretty dress with me to dress her up in. I was always into strangling, but I guess maybe something big and sharp would be more along my thing. And then I'd go to town, and it would be a night to remember. And then I'd kind of just burn everything and run for the hills.
He's had this fantasy for a long time and has thought it through. There's a couple of things which are really interesting. And one is the need to be well-dressed. And so everyone in the scene is going to be well-dressed. He's going to be in a suit.
For him, it's a means of control. Psychopaths tend to like to manipulate people and play games with people because it's a way of fulfilling some sort of enjoyment for them.
You feel sorry you did this to your mom?
In a way, yes, but I wouldn't take back what I did. It's strange, really. I did love her. In a way.
Being mean to me?
Oh, no, she's been the best mother.
Kevin Davis says a kind of love. And this, again, speaks to a psychopath's ability to identify that their emotions are not the same as others. It just shows how unbelievably warped his experience of emotion is.
My mother. She said my sister's going to come pick me up now, like in a few minutes.
Okay. What's your sister's name?
Desiree.
Was it a fantasy of yours to kill her as well?
It
and
was.
Did you write down that on your note?
Oh, I did, actually, but I decided against it because, well, I'd had my fill of killing. I didn't seem a little much. A little too excessive, yeah.
Is she okay?
She is okay, yeah.
Okay. We need to find your sister, just to make sure that she's okay. You said you didn't hurt her, right?
I did not.
We're trying to call her on the phone. We can get her.
The detectives, they're worried that he's lying. However, he's shown absolutely no signs of deception whatsoever. He has not lied about anything else up until that point.
Yes.
I thought it was familiar.
Desiree, it's Sergeant Garcia, Mr. Speedy. Please call me at this number that I'm calling you on. Talk to you. Mr. Foster. Where could she be at now, Michael?
Probably sleeping since last I checked. She works late.
Do you remember what the note said?
Keep your head. Hurry. She might still be alive, although I highly doubt it in parentheses.
Are you just messing with Desiree by writing that she might still be alive?
In my sick sense of humor,
Okay.
I was pretty well off my rocker by then.
She may yet live, although I doubt it. Hurry, Desiree. Sincerely, your brother. He says sincerely, which is something that you wouldn't necessarily write to your own sibling. But then he writes your brother, and sort of a ha 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 in your face, this is who did this to our mother.
And those were the scenes where he felt most psychopathic, where he was taunting her, and he was taunting her in a deeply cruel way.
Psychopaths generally have a pretty high bar for experiencing fear. So their kind of resting heart rate and their resting physiological response is much lower than the average person. To experience any sort of fear or kind of arousal or what we would call kind of an adrenaline rush, it needs to be amplified to such a degree that the average person would be absolutely terrified by the experience. But the psychopath needs that amount to feel any level of arousal whatsoever. So let's say the average person would get an adrenaline rush or feel afraid by watching a scary movie or going on a roller coaster. These kind of normal experiences would not really elicit a reaction from a psychopath, which is why they tend to do very extreme things in order to feel anything. They feel like they're controlling the person in some way, manipulating them, then it gets fun for them, and then they have an emotional experience. And then that unfortunately creates a cycle because they enjoy that, and so they manipulate more, and they manipulate more, and then they need to go further in order to experience that emotion. Again, similar to a drug addict, you need more and more each time. So the manipulation becomes deeper and deeper and deeper until eventually they're doing something pretty horrific.
You appear to be a nice guy. You appear to be a good guy. You're not yelling and screaming at
You seem
him.
very rational.
You're very rational. You appear to be a good guy. Just what I'm trying to figure out, that's all.
Well, despite how I ended her life, I'm kind of more fascinated by the more artistic ways of murder, the meticulous manner, the way they cut them open, just slice them to pieces. I mean, such care, such love.
It's completely counterintuitive to the emotion of love. But for him, the thought and care that he and potentially other murderers might put into these killings, that to him is the expression of love. It's clear from this video that he's done some research. He looks up to probably other murderers, people who have done things like this.
And then there's a second note in your mom's bedroom. What did that one say? Do you remember?
Chase me.
Was that addressed to the police or to who?
I was in a very playful mood at the time. Initially, my plan was just to run as far as I can, but then I ended up crying my eyes out in like the thick woods, like, oh, what did I do? I knew that my life wasn't going to go anywhere, not anymore.
He may, in fact, have cried his eyes out. This is someone who potentially has never cried before. That's an intense emotion. This is the first time he's really been able to fulfill this fantasy and experience any sort of intense emotion. And that may have been overwhelming for him, not in a negative or positive way, not because he regretted it or felt shame for it, but it was just a release.
Psychopaths don't know what it's like to be alive because what makes us feel alive, it's emotions and connection. They don't feel much and they cannot connect. And so perhaps it was one of the first times that he had such a strong, exhilarating sort of sensation. He felt alive and he wanted to stay there.
I just went over there to their house to use their phone, and then I was using their phone, so I thought I might as well tell them when they asked me questions. I mean, they had questions on using their phone.
Hold on, he's going to talk to you.
Hello?
What's going on, sir? You said that you killed her. What happened?
Well, I killed her. I guess it'll all come out in court.
But I'm saying, what, did you shoot her? Did you stab her? Or what?
I bludgeoned her with a hammer.
Okay, sir, we're going to get somebody over there to you, okay?
Okay, bye.
I'm going to use a dirty word, okay, but I don't mean to insult you, okay? Do you consider you mentally disturbed? Do you consider yourself crazy? Or you think you're okay? You just got some bad thoughts?
I mean, I'm sane. I know exactly what I did. I know that it's wrong in the traditional sense of wrong. I don't have standards or morals. Body's a body, and in the end, piece of meat. I guess it's harsh to say, but now I feel vaguely, kind of like I'm done.
If he was not apprehended, he would have geared up and done it again, potentially to his sister or somebody else. But when he says, I'm done, I think he's referring to this very specific murder and not necessarily his inclination for murder.
Do you still feel like, well, you're done with your mom. Do you still feel like you want to keep on killing?
I came here to pay for my crime, so I guess I should continue with the truth. Truthfully,
Yes, definitely.
I would kill again. It's all for me. It's gonna, I'll say it's a
The bodies of 3 women were found at the Black Bear Inn in Newry. They appear to have been shot to death.
This is a particularly gruesome, unusual type of crime.
Police say 31-year-old Christian Nielsen is their only suspect.
We are rolling.
And I parked right in front of this little church.
So you parked here.
Parked here. I had the gun in my waistband.
Did you see the gun?
Did he see the gun?
Yeah.
No.
You had planned it, but Jim had no idea.
Jim had no idea. You know, I said maybe we should go fishing. I took him out. I was thinking I'm gonna kill this guy.
Did you do it because you're evil?
Evil?
Did you do that just because you're an evil person at the core?
No, I'm a good person.
What I'd like to do is to ask you what happened. You start from the beginning, whatever you think the beginning is.
Okay. We're talking about dead people, right? Is that something you want me to talk about?
So then where do you go?
We go this way.
At this point, are you having any second thoughts?
No, at this point I'm committed.
And Jim is not sensing he's in any danger.
I guess. Jimmy sat right about there.
Did you say anything to him beforehand then?
I said I have to go to the bathroom. You know, I kind of stood up and said, I gotta go to the bathroom, you know?
Yeah.
And he said, no, you know, I'm not sure what he said. Something.
So you didn't give him any warning what was about to happen?
No, of course not. I bummed a cigarette from him, and when he was just about done with his cigarette, I stood up, and I turned around, and I walked behind him, and I shot him.
From a psych standpoint, I look for whether or not we have psychomotor agitation. Sort of, is he restless? Is he fidgeting? Is he uncomfortable? Would it give us a sign that there's more going on in his head than what he's saying? But he doesn't appear that way. From his body language and the way he's describing his action, he's indifferent to actually the content of what he's talking about.
Did you have some kind of an argument or disagreement with Jim about something?
No. Why do you think, Chris, that you decided that you wanted to shoot Jim?
I don't know. I just objected to his presence.
I don't think that this was necessarily about Jim. This was something he was going to do regardless.
You understand if someone wants to kill you because they hate you, but you have no meaning, ultimately, to a psychopath. It's like an object. You're no different than a coffee cup or than that table. So it's absolutely impersonal. But I think that's what's so scary about it.
And his body went like that, and then I shot him again just to make sure, but he was dead. And then, like I said, he had a big torso, but little legs, very tiny legs.
Jim, Christian's first victim, suffered from polio, which is why he describes him as having the legs of a child. Christian could have seen Jim as sort of prime prey. He would have been easy to chase or to sort of hunt down, so it was kind of a good gateway into murder.
And so it was no problem to grab his legs and drag him. Oh, I'm sorry. Drag him this way. So I'm dragging him right now.
Hold on. Okay. Oh, thanks.
He's keeping the branches, from striking her, which seems like an act of kindness. It's what I would call something that is dutiful. I think that's probably the underpinning of superficial charm. They actually don't have the feeling they're trying to demonstrate, but since they don't have the genuine emotion that should go with it, that's what gives the term superficial, right?
Stopped like right about here. There's blood probably. If you look, I'm sure tomorrow you'll see blood here somewhere.
Okay.
Back. Maybe back a bit, but there's blood all through here. There's blood all in that trail. At that point, I was just like, whew. Yeah, so I put the gun back in my waist. And maybe I shot him again, I'm not sure. And then I said, I gotta go to work, and I went to work. I walked back up and...
You left him here.
Left him here. I started digging. My intentions were to dig a grave, but it would have been shallow.
So you first got out here, took your shovel out and started digging here?
These dimensions right here, you can see where I started digging.
Yeah.
He actually laughs. You can hear him kind of doing this sing-song, almost laughing voice.
I just felt that it was the right thing to do.
You didn't want to leave him out in the open?
Didn't want to leave him out in the open.
Why?
He was a dead person. You do something with dead people, you bury them or something, or burn them, right?
She's pushing for a more subtle understanding of, well, what were you feeling? And it seems to throw him for a loop. She is pushing for his feelings, and he doesn't really have them.
So anyway, for whatever reason, I'm out here digging a grave. It wasn't really a grave as in like, gee, I feel bad for Jim, but a grave as in, let's get him in the ground before he starts to smell.
Terry, is there anything else?
I think we're good.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, Chris.
You're welcome, Jim.
At first, sometimes you don't know you're talking to a psychopath. Then little things begin to dawn on you as you're having a conversation with them. There's often a sense that their emotions are quite shallow. You feel like you're getting a very superficial answer back from them, that you haven't really met the person. They've given you very nice answers, they're appropriate answers, but you can walk away thinking, I don't know that person. Something feels really off. It can feel slightly irritating, although they can be charming. But you feel like you haven't been able to really communicate with that person. They're not really talking to you.
What's your philosophy?
Some people die.
Was your goal here to become a serial killer?
I thought that would be enough, Jim. I hadn't planned on killing Julie until that night at work, and then I decided to kill her. I mean, it wasn't going to be long before she realized Jimmy wasn't around. You know what I mean? Okay, so I woke up that morning, and I knew I wanted to kill her. She just sleeps until noon. I didn't have that long to wait, man. You know what I'm saying? I felt that I had to get it done quickly. You know, you make a decision like that, you know you got to do it, and you just do it.
Psychopaths do have lower impulse control. Their dorsolateral prefrontal cortex in most psychopaths is smaller than the average person, and this is diminished in a psychopath. Christian did not have great impulse control. I think he enjoyed killing Jim, and he wanted to do it again, so he did.
So I got my gun, and I walked around to the window. It was loud. I was opening up the window because I had to move the screen. And then I was like scared because her face was right there. Like the window was here and her face was there. So if she even opened her eyes, she would have seen me. Got my gun, kicked the door didn't budge, and I put it in my shoulder like that, and the door popped off, the lock, door slams open. Julie sits up, she says, no, she said, what the? She's from down south, she just goes, what the hell? I think I shot her once, and she said, oh. And I shot her again and again. And it blew her out of the bed into the wall. That was amazing. So I cut her in half, drug her out in the woods, wrapped her up in a tarp and left her. And I think I went to work.
He was doing cook line work and probably didn't attract anyone's attention as someone who was bizarre or scary or intimidating. And he doesn't apparently engage in odd or peculiar weird behaviors. He would look like an everyday individual who's smart.
Why did you want to use guns?
Because that's what you use to kill people with. I thought that'd be the quickest, most humane way to do it.
Why be humane?
Yeah.
Julie's kids are going to ask us why. What do I tell Julie's kids? Julie was a horrible person and she deserved it. So why are you laughing?
I'm sorry, I felt like I'm tired.
I'm not trying to be funny. I'm just
I know
trying
you're
to
not. I'm not trying to be a jerk. I don't care what you tell Julie's kids.
This is an illogical thing to ask him in his mind. Why are you even asking me this? Why should I possibly care? Psychopaths generally will not experience these emotions.
They're asking you about Julie. Where's Julie? I know I'm gonna kill her. Somebody's gonna die.
Okay, so what time would you get up Sunday night?
Same time. 10. Came home, went to bed.
Okay.
This morning I woke up. Ate breakfast. Cleaned. I shot her old dog because the dog was 12, 13 years old. I mean, it was way too old for a dog.
Shot the dog?
Yeah, I shot the dog. I felt bad about that.
I don't believe that Christian felt bad about killing the dog. One hallmark that we do often see in psychopaths is in early abuse of animals. It's in some ways a practice for what they're eventually going to do because they're less likely to get caught for it, because the animal's not going to tell anybody or say anything. And so animals are often kind of the gateway into some sort of aggression or violence towards a person.
Saw your friend come up from the driveway to the front door. I see them. They're chit-chatting away, blah, blah, blah. Saw your friend come up. I'm going to grab my 38, put it in my waist. And of course, they're asking you about Julie the whole time. Where's Julie? What's up with Julie? What's wrong with Julie? I don't know what to say. You know, I know I'm going to kill her, basically.
Christian killing Selby essentially was orphaning her children. Her husband had died and she had 2 children at home. So by killing her, those children now have no parents. They also have no grandmother because he had already killed her. But he doesn't care.
I'm in the office with a friend. The friend's talking to me. I met you once before. I've stayed behind the friend. And we hear Selby go in the bedroom and Selby starts talking. And the friend says, "Oh, please go ahead." I said, "I want to after you." So the friend walks into the bedroom. Selby says, "Christian, did you kill my mother?" I don't know apropos of what. Like, I don't know how Selby managed to pick up that many clues because I wiped up most of the blood, cleaning most of the blood. The door is busted. I think that's what gave it away. She saw the busted door and she was like, I don't know if she was joking or what, but she said, "Christian, did you kill my mother?" And right before she said that, or right as she was saying that, I shot her friend in the back of the head. I shot her in the head. They both went down real quick.
Did you feel like, or do you feel now that killing Jim and Julie and Selby and her friend, do you feel like that was wrong?
Well, I think I went about it badly, but I'd never done it before.
When you look at the transcripts or the speech patterns of people who have psychopathy, they don't use metaphor very often. They're very concrete, very direct, and they're somewhat confused when people push for the meaning of feelings and nuance, and they seem to be perplexed. To him, it makes no sense. It is like speaking a totally different language.
Well, I don't mean how you did it. I mean, do you think it's wrong that they're dead now?
Well, they weren't dead before, and now they're dead. So.
Do you think it's a bad thing that you did?
It doesn't make any difference. It's done. They're dead. I'm alive.
And he goes, I'm not really into those moral debates, those debates about morality. It's not really my thing. It just is what it is. So there is a perception that the rest of us are caught up in a system of rules, regulations, and things that should guide our behavior. And they are separate from it, observing it as this interesting, curious system that other people adhere to, but that does not apply to them at all times. The ones I've evaluated, and I think in these particular cases, it seems to me their view is, no, the rule's just wrong. I mean, the rule, they're indifferent to the rule. The rule makes no sense to them. If what they're going to do is in line with their fantasy or their vision, the rule has no relevance.
When your dad showed up today, you didn't kill your dad. How come?
Because my dad.
What'd you tell your dad?
About what?
About what happened?
Nothing. Really.
What was your dad's reaction?
He didn't think it was awesome or anything.
He's again almost frustrated that she doesn't understand his logic. Like, how could you ask me that? Why would I kill him? He's my dad. Why wouldn't he kill him? He killed 4 other people in the last 48 hours. He assumes that the other people are gonna kind of follow his logic and follow his line of thinking, when in fact, his line of thinking is completely deviant.
Police say 31-year-old Christian Nielsen confessed to these killings, and he's charged with 4 counts of murder.
He did us wrong. There was no sense in doing what he did. And then can't explain yourself? No. I'm sorry.
I do want to avoid a trial, simply because the outcome would be guilty.
I wish he was dead.
Those who know Christian Nielsen describe him as a bit odd, quiet, and hardworking.
I heard the news this morning, and I was like, is that the same Christian that I went to school with?
Nielsen had been working as a cook at the Sudbury Inn just down the road from the murder scene, where he had also been living.
You know, in many of the pictures, he looks directly at the camera and smiles.
He is smirking because he's amused at the degree to which everyone is fascinated about this whole thing in the first place. I think he's the outside observer saying, look at all these crazy humans. He's amused and fascinated by these strange people in this strange world who seem to be all stirred up about what he did.
Like, I could deny that I killed all those people.
Why didn't you?
I just didn't. Here we are.
It should give you a hint when you hear warning signs. If you think you've bumped into someone who might be a psychopath, there are some ways in which you begin to feel unnerved by little comments and little things. And I suspect Julie probably knew that in the B&B from one of the comments he makes. But when you're not getting that reciprocity of empathy and that conversation is moving in a different direction, you may be speaking to someone who just doesn't get emotion. Can you stop being a psychopath? Early on, if it's a kid, very young, some of the evidence from psychotherapy data says if they're really young, you may be able to shape and get people's behavior to change. I tend to be more cynical about it than some of my colleagues, but some people would disagree if they say they can change. In my experience, I don't think they do.
There are murder cases that shock a community. There are murder cases that dominate headlines for a few weeks before slowly fading into history. And then there are the rare cases that seem to burrow beneath the surface of public consciousness, refusing to disappear no matter how many years pass. This is one of those cases. A case so brutal that even seasoned investigators struggled to understand what they were looking at. A case that transformed a quiet suburban home into one of the most infamous crime scenes in modern American history. A case filled with contradictions, obsession, desire, jealousy, faith, deception, and a trail of evidence so unusual that it would eventually captivate millions of people around the world. At the center of it all stood two people. One was a charismatic young man who seemed to have his future carefully planned. He was ambitious, deeply religious, admired by friends, and known for encouraging those around him to become the best versions of themselves. The other was a woman who appeared intelligent, creative, and devoted. To some, she seemed caring and affectionate. To others, she appeared unpredictable, emotionally intense, and increasingly difficult to understand. Their relationship began like countless others. A chance meeting. A growing attraction. Late-night conversations. Shared dreams. Moments that felt exciting and full of possibility. From the outside, nothing suggested that their story would one day become the subject of documentaries, books, courtroom debates, and endless public fascination. But behind closed doors, something far more complicated was taking shape. The relationship moved forward and backward in a cycle that neither seemed able to fully escape. Affection blended with resentment. Intimacy intertwined with conflict. Emotional attachment became increasingly tangled with disappointment and insecurity. What appeared to be a love story slowly evolved into something darker. Something neither of them could completely control. By the summer of 2008, the desert heat had settled heavily over Arizona. The days were long. The air shimmered above the pavement. Neighborhoods remained quiet beneath cloudless skies. Nothing about the landscape suggested that one of the most disturbing crimes of the decade was only hours away from being discovered. For several days, friends had been unable to reach a man named Travis Alexander. At first, there seemed to be reasonable explanations. People become busy. Phones go unanswered. Plans change. But as the silence continued, concern began to grow. The people closest to him knew something was wrong. This wasn't normal. Travis was known for staying connected. He had commitments. He had responsibilities. He had people expecting to hear from him. The silence felt unnatural. And sometimes, long before evidence is found, before investigators arrive, before police reports are written, people who care deeply about someone can sense that something is terribly wrong. As the days passed, anxiety slowly transformed into fear. No one could have imagined what awaited behind the door of his home. When friends finally entered the house, they stepped into a scene that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. What they found was not simply evidence of a homicide. It was evidence of overwhelming violence. Violence so extreme that investigators would later spend years examining every detail. The body of Travis Alexander was discovered in a bathroom. The injuries were catastrophic. The sheer number of wounds raised immediate questions. Questions that would echo throughout the investigation. Questions that remain disturbing even today. What happened inside that house? What level of rage was required to inflict such injuries? Was this a crime of passion? A carefully planned execution? An act of self-defense gone horribly wrong? Or something even more complex? As detectives began their work, another mystery emerged. A camera. At first glance, it seemed insignificant. Damaged. Discarded. Hidden among ordinary household items. Yet inside that camera, investigators would eventually uncover something extraordinary. Something few homicide investigations ever possess. A timeline. A visual record. Fragments of moments captured shortly before death. Images that would become some of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case. Those photographs would reveal a story far stranger than anyone expected. A story that would pull investigators into a maze of conflicting explanations, changing narratives, and psychological questions that seemed to multiply with every answer. The deeper authorities looked, the more complicated the picture became. The woman who would eventually stand accused of murder did not tell a single story. She told several. At different moments, the truth appeared to shift. One version replaced another. Then another. Denial became explanation. Explanation became accusation. Accusation became justification. Each new account created fresh doubts. Each contradiction raised new questions. And with every change, public fascination grew. Was she lying? Was she protecting herself? Was she protecting someone else? Or was the truth buried somewhere beneath the layers of competing narratives? The case soon expanded far beyond the walls of a single home in Arizona. Television networks followed every development. Court filings became national news. Legal experts debated the evidence. Psychologists analyzed the relationship. Viewers became obsessed with every detail. People argued endlessly about guilt, motive, manipulation, trauma, and responsibility. Some believed the evidence pointed clearly toward a calculated act of murder. Others became fixated on the possibility that events inside that house were more complicated than prosecutors claimed. The arguments continued year after year. Even now, long after the verdict, discussions surrounding the case remain surprisingly intense. Perhaps that is because this story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. Questions about how well we truly know the people we love. Questions about obsession disguised as affection. Questions about the warning signs that often become obvious only after tragedy strikes. Most disturbing of all is the realization that the final days leading to this crime did not unfold inside a world of hardened criminals or organized violence. They unfolded inside ordinary lives. Ordinary conversations. Ordinary hopes. Ordinary relationships. The kind of relationship many people have experienced themselves. And that may be the reason this case continues to resonate. Because when people first hear the details, they are often shocked by the brutality. But the longer they examine the story, the more unsettling realization emerges. The violence was extraordinary. The people were not. Before the headlines, before the courtroom battles, before the televised testimony and worldwide attention, there was simply a man trying to build a future and a woman who had once shared that future with him. Somewhere between love and resentment, trust and suspicion, devotion and anger, a chain of events began that would end in bloodshed and leave countless lives permanently altered. Tonight, we begin that story. A story that starts with promise. A story that ends with death. And a story that would eventually become one of the most infamous true crime cases of the 21st century. The story of what happened in June of 2008 cannot be understood by looking only at the crime scene. To understand how two lives became permanently intertwined in one of America's most infamous murder cases, We have to travel backward, long before the flashing cameras, the courtroom testimony, and the endless public debate. We have to return to a different time, when neither Travis Alexander nor Jodi Arias could have imagined that their names would one day become known around the world. The American Southwest has a way of creating powerful contrasts. Endless stretches of desert sit beneath brilliant blue skies. The landscape appears peaceful from a distance, yet beneath the beauty lies an environment capable of extraordinary extremes. The summer heat can be relentless. The horizon seems endless. Days feel larger than life. Arizona was the kind of place where people often came searching for reinvention. Some arrived hoping to build careers. Others sought opportunity, stability, or a fresh start. It was a region where ambition and optimism often flourished side by side. Among those dreamers was a young man named Travis Alexander. People who knew Travis often described him as energetic, charismatic, and intensely driven. He possessed the kind of personality that naturally drew attention in a room. He enjoyed conversation. He enjoyed meeting people. He enjoyed encouraging others. Friends frequently remembered his confidence, but they also remembered his warmth. Yet the image many people would later see in photographs only revealed part of the story. Behind the smile was a man whose life had not always been easy. Like many people who eventually become successful, Travis carried experiences that shaped the way he viewed the world. Hardship had taught him resilience. Challenges had strengthened his determination. Rather than allowing difficult circumstances to define him, he appeared committed to building something better. As he entered adulthood, he became increasingly focused on personal growth. He was deeply involved in his faith and surrounded himself with people who shared similar values. Religion was not simply something he practiced occasionally. It influenced how he viewed relationships, responsibility, and the future he hoped to create. Friends often saw him as a source of motivation. He encouraged people to pursue goals. He spoke about self-improvement. He appeared optimistic about what lay ahead. To many observers, Travis seemed like someone whose life was moving in a positive direction. He had ambitions. He had plans. He had a growing circle of friends. He appeared to be building the future he wanted. And yet, beneath every public image exists a private reality. Like anyone else, Travis had flaws, insecurities, and complicated emotions. Relationships were not always simple. Expectations did not always align with reality. The gap between who we hope to be and who we actually are can sometimes become larger than outsiders realize. Several states away, another life was unfolding. Jodi Arias presented a very different image. She was artistic, independent, and often described as intelligent. Photography interested her. Creativity interested her. She possessed a quiet confidence that could quickly transform into intensity when she felt strongly about something. People who met her frequently noticed her ability to adapt to different social situations. She could appear reserved one moment and engaging the next. Different people often formed different impressions of her. Some viewed her as thoughtful and kind. Others sensed a complexity that was harder to define. At this point in the story, however, none of those perceptions carried the significance they would later acquire. She was simply another young woman trying to navigate adulthood. Like millions of others, she experienced uncertainty about the future. She pursued relationships. She pursued opportunities. She searched for meaning and direction. There was nothing about either life that suggested a tragedy was approaching. Their paths might never have crossed. Under different circumstances, they could have remained strangers forever. But fate has a strange way of bringing people together. In September of 2006, their worlds collided. The meeting occurred during a business conference associated with a company both were involved with. Such events are designed to inspire ambition. Large groups gather in conference halls. Speakers discuss success. Attendees exchange ideas, business cards, and personal stories. The atmosphere is often charged with excitement and possibility. For Travis, these gatherings were familiar territory. For Jodi, they represented opportunity. Somewhere amid that environment, They met. No flashing warning signs appeared. No dramatic moment announced the danger ahead. Like countless relationships, theirs began with conversation. Two people learning about one another. Two people discovering shared interests. Two people experiencing the excitement that often accompanies new attraction. Relationships rarely begin at their ending. They begin with possibility. The early stages often feel exciting precisely because the future remains unknown. Phone calls become longer. Messages become more frequent. Small details suddenly matter. A person who was once a stranger gradually becomes part of daily life. That process unfolded between Travis and Jody. Distance separated them geographically, but communication helped bridge the gap. Conversations continued. Interest deepened. Attraction grew. To outsiders, it may have appeared ordinary. But relationships are rarely experienced from the outside. Inside them, emotions can feel enormous. Every message carries meaning. Every silence invites interpretation. Every expression of affection creates attachment. Over time, Jody became increasingly involved in Travis's world. She showed interest in the things that mattered to him. She learned about his faith. She became acquainted with aspects of his social circle. The connection between them appeared to strengthen. For a period, it seemed entirely possible that their relationship could develop into something lasting. People close to Travis observed the growing connection. Some approved. Others had concerns. As with many relationships, impressions varied depending on who was asked. What matters is that the relationship was real. The emotions were real. The attachment was real. And the consequences would eventually become real as well. One of the most important aspects of this period is understanding that neither Travis nor Jody existed as simple characters in a story of good and evil. They were human beings. Human beings bring expectations, fears, insecurities, desires, and emotional baggage into every relationship. Sometimes those elements remain manageable. Sometimes they grow. Sometimes they become powerful enough to reshape everything. As months passed, signs of strain began appearing. The relationship did not move forward in a straight line. Moments of closeness were followed by distance. Periods of affection were followed by tension. Disagreements emerged. Reconciliations followed. Then new conflicts appeared. People on the outside often assume troubled relationships collapse immediately. In reality, many continue for months or years. Emotional bonds can survive repeated disappointment. Hope often survives evidence. People continue believing things will improve. They continue believing the next conversation will solve the problem. The next promise will be different. The next chance will finally bring stability. That pattern would become increasingly important in the story of Travis Alexander and Jodi Arias. The relationship developed a rhythm that was difficult to define and even harder to escape. Connection. Conflict. Distance. Reconnect ion. Again and again. To friends observing from nearby, the dynamic sometimes appeared unhealthy. Questions emerged. Was the relationship helping either of them move forward? Or was it pulling both of them into something increasingly complicated? No one could answer those questions with certainty. Not then. The future remained hidden. The tragedy remained unwritten. The headlines did not yet exist. During this period, Travis continued focusing on personal goals and future plans. He remained active within his religious community and maintained friendships that occupied an important place in his life. He talked about aspirations and possibilities. He appeared eager to continue building the life he envisioned. At the same time, the emotional complexity of his relationship with Jodi continued growing beneath the surface. Relationships often leave traces before they become crises. Small arguments, misunderstandings, jealousy, hurt feelings, unspoken expectations. Each individual moment may appear insignificant. Yet over time, those moments accumulate. They form patterns. Patterns become habits. Habits shape decisions. And decisions create consequences. Looking backward from the perspective of the crime, it becomes tempting to search for a single turning point. A single argument. A single mistake. A single moment when everything changed. Real life is rarely that simple. The path toward tragedy is often built from hundreds of smaller moments that seem ordinary while they are happening. A conversation. A disappointment. A fear. A misunderstanding. A choice. Then another choice. Then another. By the beginning of 2008, the relationship between Travis and Jody had already become far more complicated than either had likely imagined when they first met. Emotions remained powerful. Expectations remained unresolved. The future remained uncertain. Neither person appeared fully able to move on. Neither seemed capable of creating lasting stability together. They remained connected even as tension continued growing. And somewhere beyond the horizon, June was approaching. The Arizona summer was approaching. The final chapter was approaching. Neither Travis Alexander nor Jodi Arias could see it yet. But the story that began with attraction, hope, and possibility was already moving toward a destination neither could escape. A destination waiting quietly behind the bright desert sunlight. A destination that would transform a troubled relationship into one of the most discussed criminal cases of the modern era. Every true crime story contains a danger that is easy to overlook. As public attention gravitates toward shocking evidence, courtroom drama, and the psychology of the accused, the victim sometimes begins to disappear from the narrative. Their life becomes reduced to a photograph shown on television screens, a name repeated in headlines, or a brief description contained within police reports. Yet before tragedy entered the story, before investigators arrived at a crime scene, before reporters filled news broadcasts with speculation and analysis, there was a real person living a real life. To understand the impact of what happened in June of 2008, we must first understand the man whose future was taken away. His name was Travis Victor Alexander. Long before his name became associated with one of the most famous murder trials in modern America, Travis was simply a boy growing up under circumstances that often felt uncertain and unstable. The childhood he experienced was not the kind typically described in stories of comfort and security. Life presented challenges early. The environment around him frequently demanded resilience before he was old enough to fully understand why. For many children, home represents predictability. For Travis, that sense of predictability was not always guaranteed. Difficult family circumstances created instability during important developmental years. The adults responsible for providing structure often struggled with problems of their own. Situations emerged that no child should have to navigate alone. Children raised in difficult environments tend to develop one of two outlooks. Some begin expecting disappointment. Others become determined to create a better future than the one they inherited. People who knew Travis later in life often believed he belonged firmly in the second category. The hardships of his early years did not disappear. They became fuel. Instead of allowing adversity to define him, he appeared increasingly motivated by the belief that his future could be different from his past. That belief would become one of the defining characteristics of his personality. As he grew older, Travis developed a reputation for persistence. He did not view obstacles as permanent. He viewed them as problems requiring solutions. Friends and acquaintances frequently remembered his ability to remain optimistic even when circumstances became difficult. The confidence that people later observed in him was not necessarily the confidence of someone who had always enjoyed an easy life. It was often the confidence of someone who had survived hardship and learned to keep moving forward. By the time he entered adulthood, Travis was actively shaping the person he wanted to become. He embraced personal development with unusual enthusiasm. He read motivational material. He set goals. He spoke openly about success. He invested significant energy into self-improvement. Many people dream about changing their lives. Travis seemed committed to actively doing it. One of the most important influences during this period was his faith. Religion occupied a central place in his life and identity. For Travis, Faith was not simply a collection of beliefs practiced on certain days of the week. It shaped how he viewed relationships, morality, purpose, and the future. It provided structure. It provided community. It provided a framework through which he interpreted both success and hardship. Those who worshipped alongside him often remembered a man who appeared deeply committed to his spiritual journey. He spoke about faith openly. He encouraged others. He participated actively in his religious community. Many people respected him for that dedication. Faith also influenced how he imagined his future. Like countless young adults, Travis hoped to eventually build a family of his own. He wanted meaningful relationships. He wanted stability. He wanted a life that reflected the values he believed were important. To people around him, he often seemed focused on becoming the best version of himself. His ambitions extended beyond spirituality. Professionally, Travis worked hard to establish success and financial independence. He became involved in business opportunities that promised personal growth and advancement. He enjoyed networking. He enjoyed meeting people. He enjoyed discussing goals and possibilities. Those who attended events with him frequently noticed his energy. He could engage strangers in conversation with remarkable ease. He smiled often. He carried himself confidently. He projected enthusiasm. The impression he left on others was frequently positive. Friends described him as charismatic, supportive, motivating, fun to be around. Many people genuinely enjoyed his company. Photographs from that period often show him smiling broadly, standing among friends, traveling, participating in social gatherings, celebrating achievements. At first glance, the images suggest a man enjoying life. And in many ways, he was. Yet photographs reveal only fragments of reality. No image captures every insecurity. No image captures every disappointment. No image captures every private struggle. Like everyone else, Travis contained contradictions. He could be confident and uncertain, hopeful and frustrated, strong and vulnerable. These complexities become particularly important when examining his relationships. Human beings rarely fit neatly into categories. Victims are not saints. Suspects are not always monsters. Real people exist somewhere between those extremes. Understanding Travis requires recognizing that he was a human being navigating life with all the imperfections that accompany that experience. As his social circle expanded, relationships naturally became an increasingly important part of his world. He was considered attractive by many people who knew him. He was outgoing, social, comfortable around others. These qualities contributed to an active dating life. But they also created complications. Relationships rarely unfold exactly as we imagine. Expectations collide with reality. Desires conflict with obligations. People hurt one another without intending to. The pursuit of connection often introduces emotional complexity. By the mid-2000s, Travis appeared determined to continue moving forward. His future seemed full of possibilities. He spoke about goals. He made plans. He remained involved with friends and community activities. The path ahead appeared open. Then came the meeting that would eventually alter everything. When Jodi Arias entered his life, the connection initially seemed promising. There was attraction. There was excitement. There was curiosity. Like many relationships, it began with possibility rather than conflict. Neither person could foresee the consequences waiting years ahead. As their relationship developed, however, complexity emerged. The emotional dynamic between them became increasingly difficult to define. Periods of closeness alternated with periods of distance. Attempts to move forward often appeared followed by setbacks. The relationship developed a pattern that proved difficult to sustain yet equally difficult to abandon. For Travis, this emotional uncertainty unfolded alongside everything else he was trying to build. Career goals remained important. Faith remained important. Friendships remained important. Future plans remained important. Yet relationships have a way of influencing every other aspect of life. Emotional tension rarely stays confined to a single area. It spreads. It affects decision-making. It affects priorities. It affects perception. People around Travis occasionally noticed signs of frustration regarding the relationship. Some friends reportedly expressed concerns. Others encouraged caution. The reasons varied. What mattered was that those closest to him increasingly recognized the connection was not simple. Still, life continued. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. The future remained uncertain. And Travis continued moving toward it. By early 2008, there were numerous reasons for optimism. He remained active, social, ambitious, engaged with the people around him. Friends later recalled conversations about upcoming plans and future possibilities. Nothing suggested that his life was approaching its conclusion. This is one of the most heartbreaking aspects of nearly every homicide case. The victim rarely knows their final chapter has already begun. They continue making plans. They schedule appointments. They arrange future events. They buy plane tickets. They make phone calls. They imagine tomorrow. The future exists vividly in their minds. Only later do others realize those plans would never happen. As the spring of 2008 gradually transitioned toward summer, Travis continued participating in everyday life. The Arizona sun rose each morning over quiet neighborhoods and desert landscapes. Traffic flowed through familiar streets. Businesses opened their doors. People went to work. Friends gathered. Conversations unfolded. Life appeared entirely normal. Among those ordinary days were the final weeks of Travis Alexander's life. He could not see them as final weeks. No one could. The future still seemed available. Possibility still seemed endless. The man smiling in photographs had no reason to believe that the time remaining to him was rapidly shrinking. Perhaps that is what makes stories like this so profoundly unsettling. Death is often imagined as something dramatic and obvious. In reality, it frequently approaches invisibly. A person may spend an afternoon discussing future plans without realizing they will never experience them. A person may say goodbye to friends without understanding it is the last farewell. A person may go to sleep believing tomorrow is guaranteed. Travis Alexander was no different. The final days before the crime did not unfold beneath storm clouds or ominous warnings. They unfolded beneath ordinary skies. Ordinary routines. Ordinary expectations. He remained connected to friends. He remained engaged with life. He remained focused on the future. The future he imagined included opportunities still waiting to be explored. Places still waiting to be visited. Experiences still waiting to happen. Like every victim of homicide, he possessed something far more valuable than public attention or media coverage. He possessed potential. Potential that would never be realized. Potential that would forever remain unfinished. When people later discussed the case, debates often focused on evidence, motives, and conflicting testimony. Yet behind every argument stood a simple truth. A human life had ended. A family would never see their loved one again. Friends would never share another conversation with him. Dreams would never become reality. Plans would never be completed. The future had been stolen. And as June 2008 approached, Travis Alexander continued moving through life unaware that some of the people who cared about him were only days away from receiving devastating news. News that would leave them shocked. News that would leave investigators searching for answers. News that would transform a private tragedy into an international obsession. For now, however, those answers remained hidden. The headlines had not yet appeared. The police investigation had not yet begun. The courtroom remained years away. There was only a man living his life beneath the Arizona sun, carrying hopes for tomorrow, surrounded by people who cared about him, unaware that the final chapter of his story was already beginning to unfold. And somewhere beyond the horizon of those ordinary days, death was quietly drawing closer. June 4, 2008, began like countless other summer days in Arizona. The sun climbed steadily over the horizon, washing the desert landscape in pale gold light. Neighborhood streets slowly awakened. Cars rolled from driveways. Businesses opened their doors. Air conditioners hummed against the growing heat. To everyone moving through their ordinary routines, it seemed destined to be an ordinary day. Nothing about the morning suggested that somewhere inside a quiet home in Mesa, a sequence of events was unfolding that would eventually become one of the most discussed and analyzed crimes in modern American history. The house itself appeared unremarkable. It sat among other homes where families lived, worked, and planned their futures. Neighbors came and went. Lawns were maintained. Daily life moved forward with familiar predictability. Inside that house was Travis Alexander. At that moment, no one outside could know they were witnessing the final hours of his life. Years later, investigators, attorneys, journalists, and members of the public would spend countless hours attempting to reconstruct exactly what happened during those critical moments. They would examine photographs, timelines, travel records, phone activity, witness statements, and forensic evidence. Yet despite all of that information, there remains something haunting about the final chapter. Only 2 people truly knew what happened inside that home. One of them never had the opportunity to tell his story. The other would tell several different versions. The relationship between Travis Alexander and Jodi Arias had already become complicated long before that day arrived. Their history was marked by attraction and conflict, connection and distance, affection and frustration. What had once appeared to be a promising romance had gradually transformed into something far more unstable. Emotions often leave traces long before violence occurs. Arguments create wounds that cannot be photographed. Resentment grows quietly. Jealousy develops beneath ordinary conversations. Disappointment accumulates. People say things they later regret. People hear things they cannot forget. The exact emotional landscape leading into that day remains a subject of debate, but one fact is clear. The relationship had become deeply troubled. By June of 2008, tensions existed beneath the surface that neither person appeared fully capable of resolving. Yet on that day, the 2 found themselves together. At some point, life inside the house continued with an appearance of normalcy. There were conversations. There were moments captured by a camera. There was no obvious indication, at least from the surviving evidence, that catastrophe had already become inevitable. That reality would later become one of the most chilling aspects of the case. Photographs recovered during the investigation showed images taken not long before the killing. When investigators eventually examined those images, they found snapshots of ordinary moments frozen in time. Moments that appeared completely disconnected from the violence that would soon follow. Human beings often assume that tragedy announces itself. We expect warning signs. We expect dramatic confrontations. We expect visible indicators that something terrible is about to happen. Reality is often far more disturbing. Sometimes a person's final moments begin in complete normalcy. A casual conversation. A shared laugh. A routine activity. The transition from ordinary life to irreversible violence can occur with shocking speed. At some point during the afternoon, events inside the house changed. What exactly triggered the shift remains one of the most contested questions in the entire case. Prosecutors would later argue that the killing was deliberate. The defense would eventually claim self-defense. Public debate would continue for years. But regardless of interpretation, the outcome remained undeniable. A violent confrontation occurred. The life of Travis Alexander came to an end. The level of violence involved shocked even experienced investigators. This was not the type of crime scene typically associated with a spontaneous disagreement that escalated unexpectedly. The injuries documented by investigators suggested an event of extraordinary intensity. An event that unfolded with overwhelming force. An event that would leave detectives struggling to understand the emotional and psychological state of the person responsible. Violence is often discussed in statistics. Reports list injuries. Documents record measurements. Court records summarize evidence. Yet behind every clinical description lies a profoundly human reality. A struggle. Fear. Pain. Confusion. The sudden realization that something is terribly wrong. Those final moments can never be fully reconstructed. No investigator can completely recover them. No courtroom testimony can perfectly recreate them. What remains are fragments. Fragments of evidence. Fragments of physical clues. Fragments of timelines. Together, they form an incomplete picture of a complete tragedy. At some stage during the incident, a firearm was discharged. At another stage, a knife was used. The sequence would later become the subject of intense forensic analysis. Investigators sought to determine not only what happened, but in what order it happened. Every detail mattered. Every minute mattered. Every physical clue became part of a larger puzzle. While detectives would eventually piece together much of the timeline, one reality stood above all others. The confrontation did not end with survival. It ended with death. Afterward, silence settled over the house. The kind of silence that often follows catastrophe. Outside, the world continued moving. Neighbors remained unaware. Traffic continued along nearby roads. People attended meetings. Families prepared dinner. The sun continued its journey across the Arizona sky. The contrast feels almost impossible to comprehend. Inside one home, a life had ended. Outside, life continued as if nothing had happened. Hours passed. Then more hours. No emergency call immediately brought police rushing to the scene. No public alarm announced what had occurred. Instead, the truth remained hidden. And as it remained hidden, another chapter of the story quietly began. The period after the killing would later attract enormous attention from investigators. Because crimes do not end when violence stops. They continue through actions taken afterward. Decisions made in the aftermath often reveal as much as the crime itself. People react differently under pressure. Some seek help. Some flee. Some attempt to explain. Some attempt to conceal. Investigators would later examine every available clue connected to those hours following Travis Alexander's death. Travel records. Receipts. Phone activity. Witness observations. Each detail became part of a larger effort to understand not only what happened but why. The answers did not come immediately. In fact, the truth remained hidden for days. That delay would ultimately become one of the most unsettling aspects of the case. While friends and acquaintances continued with their lives, unaware of what had occurred, Travis Alexander was already gone. Plans he had made would never be completed. Appointments would never be attended. Conversations would never take place. The future he had imagined no longer existed. Yet nobody knew. For several days, concern would slowly begin to replace normal expectations. People noticed the silence. Messages went unanswered. Communication stopped. The absence felt unusual. Then it began to feel alarming. But on the day itself, none of those concerns had fully emerged. The house remained quiet. The truth remained concealed. And somewhere within that silence sat clues that would eventually expose one of the most extraordinary criminal investigations of the decade. Among those clues was an object investigators had no reason to expect. A damaged camera. At first glance, it appeared insignificant. Just another item among many. Yet hidden inside that device were images capable of transforming the entire case. Images that would survive even when other explanations changed. Images that would become silent witnesses to events no living observer could fully describe. The significance of that discovery still lay in the future. For now, the house held its secrets. The victim remained undiscovered. The investigation had not yet begun. The media had not yet arrived. The courtroom battles remained years away. Only silence remained. Silence inside a house where a young man's life had come to an end. Silence that would last just long enough for concern to become fear. and fear to become a discovery that would shock everyone who knew him. The most violent chapter of the story was over. The mystery was only beginning. For several days, the silence surrounding Travis Alexander existed without explanation. At first, nobody immediately assumed the worst. People miss phone calls. Messages go unanswered. Plans change. Life becomes busy. In a world where schedules constantly collide and obligations compete for attention, a few days of silence rarely trigger panic. But this situation felt different. Those who knew Travis best understood his habits. They understood his personality. He was not someone who simply disappeared without warning. He maintained friendships. He communicated regularly. He stayed engaged with the people around him. The longer the silence continued, the more unsettling it became. Concern began quietly. A missed response. An unanswered call. A growing sense that something was not right. Then concern slowly transformed into worry. Worry transformed into fear. And fear eventually compelled action. Friends who had been unable to reach Travis decided to check on him personally. The decision would change their lives forever. The Arizona summer heat pressed down upon the neighborhood as they approached the house. From the outside, everything appeared normal. There were no flashing lights. No signs of forced entry visible from a distance. No obvious indication that anything catastrophic had occurred. The house sat quietly beneath the bright desert sun. Ordinary. Still. Deceptively peaceful. Moments like these often become frozen in memory. Years later, people can still recall where they stood. What they were thinking. The strange feeling in the pit of their stomach before the truth revealed itself. Something had already begun to feel wrong. They simply did not yet understand how wrong. As they entered the residence, the atmosphere immediately felt unusual. There is a particular quality to a home that has been abandoned unexpectedly. A subtle absence. A sense that normal life has stopped moving. Investigators later hear descriptions like these repeatedly from witnesses who discover crime scenes. The details vary. The feeling does not. The house no longer felt lived in. It felt interrupted. The search began. Room by room. Step by step. Voices calling out. No answer. More searching. More uncertainty. Then came the moment everything changed. Inside the bathroom, they found Travis Alexander. Nothing could have prepared them for what they saw. The scene before them was shocking beyond comprehension. The man they knew. The friend they had expected to find alive. The person whose phone simply seemed to have gone silent. Was gone. In an instant, confusion disappeared. Fear became reality. Whatever uncertainty had existed vanished completely. This was no accident. This was no medical emergency. This was violence. Extreme violence. The discovery sent shockwaves through everyone present. For the individuals who found him, the memory would become impossible to erase. Crime scene photographs eventually become evidence. Reports become documents. Court testimony becomes transcripts. But before any of those things exist, there are human beings forced to confront unimaginable reality. A friend becomes a victim. A familiar face becomes a crime scene. A life becomes a memory. Emergency services were contacted. Soon police officers, investigators, and crime scene personnel began arriving at the residence. What awaited them inside would immediately signal the seriousness of the case. Experienced investigators encounter violence throughout their careers. They develop professional distance. They learn how to analyze evidence objectively. Yet even experienced detectives occasionally encounter scenes that remain deeply disturbing. This was one of those scenes. The injuries sustained by Travis Alexander indicated extraordinary brutality. The sheer level of violence raised urgent questions. Who had done this? Why? What sequence of events could possibly have produced such devastation? The investigation immediately shifted into motion. Crime scene personnel began documenting everything. Every room. Every object. Every visible clue. Photographs were taken. Measurements recorded. Evidence marked and preserved. The goal was simple in theory but enormously complex in practice. Reconstruct the truth. The challenge facing investigators was immense. The victim could not explain what happened. The offender was unknown. The timeline remained unclear. Every answer would need to emerge from physical evidence. Fortunately for detectives, physical evidence often tells a story. Not a perfect story. Not a complete story. But a story nonetheless. Blood patterns. Footwear impressions. Digital records. Personal belongings. Every element becomes part of a larger narrative. The question is whether investigators can read it correctly. As the crime scene examination continued, detectives noticed something important. The residence showed no obvious signs of a conventional burglary. Valuable items remained present. The scene did not immediately resemble a random robbery gone wrong. That observation influenced early thinking. If theft did not appear to be the primary motive, what did that suggest? Was the victim targeted personally? Did he know the individual responsible? Had the violence emerged from a relationship rather than a chance encounter? Questions multiplied faster than answers. Investigators began interviewing people close to Travis. Friends. Associates. Acquaintances. Anyone capable of providing insight into his recent activities. As detectives learned more about his life, a recurring name began appearing. Jodi Arias. At that stage, however, investigators were still assembling fragments. The broader picture remained incomplete. Meanwhile, the forensic examination continued. Every corner of the home received attention. Detectives understood that seemingly insignificant discoveries sometimes become decisive evidence. A receipt. A fingerprint. A hair. A digital record. History contains countless cases solved by details initially overlooked. The challenge was identifying which details mattered. Then investigators discovered something unexpected. A digital camera. At first glance, it appeared damaged. Not merely misplaced. Damaged. The camera had been discarded in a washing machine. Such a location immediately attracted attention. Why would a camera end up there? Was its presence accidental? Or had someone attempted to destroy evidence? The possibility electrified investigators. Digital devices often contain valuable information. Photographs capture moments. Moments establish timelines. Timelines expose lies. The damaged camera was collected and submitted for forensic analysis. At that moment, nobody fully understood how important it would become. Yet experienced investigators recognized potential. Sometimes the smallest piece of evidence changes everything. The camera would eventually prove exactly that. As forensic specialists worked to recover data, detectives continued examining other aspects of the case. They reviewed recent contacts, travel activity, phone records, personal relationships. The process resembled assembling an enormous puzzle without knowing what the finished image should look like. One fact became increasingly clear. This crime likely involved someone who knew Travis. The theory was not yet proven, but evidence seemed to point in that direction. The violence felt personal. The circumstances felt personal. The absence of obvious robbery indicators felt personal. Of course, early assumptions can be dangerous. Good investigators remain cautious. They follow evidence rather than emotion. Yet intuition often develops alongside facts. And many detectives reportedly sensed that the answer might exist within the victim's personal relationships. While investigators worked, news of the death spread outward. Family members received devastating information. Friends struggled to process the reality. Shock rippled through social circles. People who had spoken with Travis days earlier suddenly found themselves discussing him in the past tense. The transformation felt unreal. One day someone is planning future events. The next day they are gone. Human beings rarely adapt to that transition easily. Grief arrives in waves. Disbelief arrives first. Acceptance comes later. Sometimes much later. For those closest to Travis, the investigation represented more than a search for evidence. It represented a search for understanding. Why had this happened? Who was responsible? Could justice eventually provide answers? Those questions hung over every conversation, every interview, every new development. Meanwhile, forensic specialists continued examining the contents of the damaged camera. The device appeared damaged enough that some individuals might have assumed its contents were permanently lost. Fortunately, technology often preserves more information than offenders expect. Investigators succeeded in recovering data. What they found was extraordinary. Photographs. Images taken inside the house. Images connected to the final day of Travis Alexander's life. The significance of the discovery became apparent almost immediately. Many homicide investigations rely on witness statements and circumstantial timelines. This case suddenly possessed something far more unusual. Visual documentation. Moments frozen in time. Moments captured shortly before death. As detectives reviewed the recovered images, they realized the camera might provide one of the clearest windows into the crime. The photographs established chronology, presence, opportunity, potentially much more. What had initially appeared to be a damaged and discarded object was rapidly becoming one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire investigation. The discovery transformed the case. Questions that once seemed impossible to answer suddenly appeared within reach. The mystery had not been solved. Not yet. But the darkness surrounding the crime scene had begun to crack. For the first time, investigators could glimpse a path forward. The victim had been found. The crime scene had been documented. The evidence had begun to speak. And among all the clues collected from that quiet house in Mesa, one damaged camera was preparing to tell a story that would eventually captivate an entire nation. The discovery phase of the investigation was ending. The pursuit of the killer was about to begin. In the days following the discovery of Travis Alexander's body, investigators found themselves confronting a case that seemed both straightforward and deeply confusing at the same time. The violence suggested personal involvement. The crime scene suggested familiarity. Yet certainty remained elusive. Every homicide investigation begins with questions, but the most difficult cases are often the ones where multiple answers appear possible. Detectives knew they could not allow assumptions to guide them. The evidence would need to lead the way. Inside police offices, walls gradually filled with photographs, timelines, interview notes, maps, and investigative reports. Every known movement connected to Travis Alexander's final days was documented and examined. Detectives worked methodically, constructing a picture of his life in the weeks before his death. Who had spoken to him? Who had seen him? Who might have had a reason to harm him? The search extended outward through friends, co-workers, acquaintances, family members, and former romantic partners. As investigators dug deeper into Travis's personal life, one reality became increasingly apparent. Relationships occupied an important place within the story. Whenever a homicide appears personal, detectives inevitably examine the people closest to the victim. Statistically, violence often emerges from existing relationships rather than random encounters. That reality does not prove guilt. It simply provides a logical starting point. Among the names repeatedly appearing during interviews was Jodi Arias. Friends knew her. Associates knew about her. Investigators quickly learned that she and Travis had shared a complicated romantic history. That information immediately elevated her importance within the investigation. At that stage, however, importance did not equal guilt. Detectives remained cautious. Relationships generate emotional reactions, but emotional reactions alone do not solve murders. Evidence does. While interviews continued, forensic specialists focused on the physical evidence recovered from the crime scene. The damaged digital camera quickly became one of the most significant pieces of evidence in the case. When technicians successfully recovered photographs stored within the device, investigators realized they possessed something extraordinarily rare: a visual timeline. The images provided snapshots of Travis Alexander alive inside his home on the day of the killing. Those photographs narrowed uncertainty. They established chronology. They established presence. Most importantly, they began establishing who had been there. The camera did not tell the entire story, but it told enough to focus attention. As detectives continued gathering information, questions surrounding Jodi Arias became increasingly difficult to ignore. They needed to know where she had been, what she had been doing, whether she had seen Travis recently, whether she could explain evidence placing her near the victim. These questions formed the foundation of countless investigations. The first conversations with potential suspects are often revealing. Not necessarily because they confess. More often because their explanations either align with evidence or conflict with it. Investigators eventually spoke with Jodi. Initially, she denied being present during the killing. The statement appeared simple, direct, unequivocal. She maintained she had not been involved. At first glance, such a denial might appear unsurprising. Many innocent people deny involvement because they are innocent. Many guilty people deny involvement because they are guilty. The statement itself proved nothing. Detectives therefore compared it against available evidence. That process produced immediate problems. The evidence increasingly suggested that Jodi had been with Travis during the relevant time frame. The contradiction demanded explanation. Experienced investigators often pay close attention to inconsistencies. Truth tends to remain stable. Fabricated stories often require adjustment. As evidence accumulated, the gap between Jodi's account and investigative findings became increasingly difficult to reconcile. Then something important happened. Her explanation changed. Rather than maintaining her original denial, she introduced a different narrative. Now she acknowledged being present but claimed that unknown intruders were responsible for the killing. According to this version, masked individuals had entered the situation and committed the murder. For detectives, the revised account generated even more questions. Who were these individuals? Why had they targeted Travis Alexander? What evidence supported their existence? Investigators searched. They examined the claim carefully. Yet evidence supporting the intruder theory failed to emerge. No independent witnesses confirmed it. No physical evidence substantiated it. No investigative findings pointed toward unidentified attackers. The theory remained unsupported. Meanwhile, evidence continued pointing in another direction. Cases sometimes reach a stage where investigators feel as though they are chasing moving shadows. Every time one question appears answered, another emerges. Every statement requires verification. Every explanation requires testing. That was exactly the situation developing here. The investigation had become a battle between narratives and evidence. One side changed. The other did not. Physical evidence remained stubbornly consistent. As scrutiny intensified, another shift occurred. Jodi's explanation changed again. This time she acknowledged killing Travis Alexander but claimed she had acted in self-defense. The transformation was dramatic. The evolution of the story immediately drew attention. First, she had not been present. Then she had been present while unknown attackers committed the murder. Now she admitted responsibility while asserting justification. For prosecutors, these changing accounts became one of the most powerful indicators of deception. For defense attorneys, the challenge became explaining why such significant changes had occurred. Public interest in the case would later become heavily focused on these contradictions. People naturally ask themselves a simple question. Why would an innocent person tell multiple conflicting stories? The answer is not always straightforward. Fear, trauma, confusion, panic, and self-preservation can influence behavior in unpredictable ways. Yet investigators could not focus on psychology alone. They required evidence. And the evidence continued growing. Detectives expanded their examination beyond interviews. Travel records became important. Gasoline purchases became important. Phone activity became important. Every movement associated with the days surrounding the killing received scrutiny. A timeline gradually emerged. Like pieces of a puzzle locking into place, individual facts began forming a larger picture. The picture was not favorable to Jodi Arias. Investigators believed they were observing indications of planning rather than spontaneity. Certain travel decisions attracted attention. Certain logistical details attracted attention. Certain inconsistencies attracted attention. Each discovery added weight to the prosecution's eventual theory that the murder had been premeditated. At the same time, defense perspectives pointed elsewhere. They emphasized emotional conflict, relationship dynamics, claims of self-defense, questions regarding what had actually occurred during the fatal confrontation. The investigation therefore evolved into more than a search for a killer. It became a search for motive. Why is often harder to prove than who. Physical evidence can establish presence. Motive requires understanding human behavior. And human behavior rarely follows simple formulas. Detectives reviewed the history between Travis and Jodi. Messages. Conversations. Patterns. The relationship appeared increasingly turbulent the deeper investigators looked. Accounts described cycles of affection and conflict, connection and separation, attachment and resentment. These findings suggested emotional intensity. But emotional intensity alone could not explain homicide. Investigators needed something more. As weeks passed, the case continued attracting attention. The brutal nature of the killing ensured that interest remained high. Each new development generated discussion. Friends mourned. Families searched for understanding. Investigators continued working. The public knew little of what was happening behind closed doors. But inside investigative offices, momentum was building. The evidence was becoming increasingly organized. The timeline increasingly coherent. The contradictions increasingly visible. One of the most powerful moments in many investigations occurs when separate pieces suddenly begin reinforcing one another. A witness statement supports forensic evidence. Forensic evidence supports a timeline. The timeline supports a motive. Gradually, uncertainty shrinks. Confidence grows. Detectives began reaching that stage. The case was far from complete. Yet the direction seemed increasingly clear. Physical evidence, recovered photographs, travel information, and changing statements were beginning to converge. The convergence mattered because homicide prosecutions demand more than suspicion. They demand proof. Investigators understood that every conclusion would eventually face scrutiny from defense attorneys, judges, jurors, and the public. Every fact needed support. Every claim needed evidence. Nothing could rest upon assumptions. By late stages of the investigation, detectives believed they possessed a compelling narrative supported by physical findings. The challenge now involved preparing that evidence for court. Because solving a crime and proving a crime are not the same thing. Many investigations identify likely offenders. Far fewer survive the rigorous examination of a courtroom. The evidence would soon face that test. But before attorneys could argue before jurors, investigators needed one final thing. A comprehensive understanding of how all the pieces fit together. The damaged camera. The timeline. The travel records. The conflicting statements. The relationship history. The forensic findings. Each component represented a separate thread. Together, they formed a rope strong enough to pull the case toward prosecution. The mystery that had begun with silence inside a suburban home was no longer centered on identifying possible suspects. Attention had narrowed. The focus had sharpened. Investigators believed they knew who had been present. They believed they knew who was responsible. What remained was proving it beyond reasonable doubt. And as the investigation entered its next phase, a courtroom battle was beginning to take shape. A battle that would eventually captivate millions of viewers, divide public opinion, and transform an Arizona murder case into one of the most famous criminal trials of the 21st century. The search for answers was nearly complete. The fight over those answers was about to begin. Every major criminal investigation reaches a moment when scattered fragments suddenly begin forming a recognizable picture. Before that moment, detectives operate inside uncertainty. Evidence exists, but its meaning remains incomplete. Witnesses provide information, but their accounts do not always align. Theories emerge and collapse. Possibilities multiply. Then, sometimes unexpectedly, a breakthrough occurs. A discovery. A contradiction. A piece of evidence that refuses to fit any explanation except one. For investigators working the murder of Travis Alexander, that breakthrough did not arrive as a dramatic confession or a single miraculous clue. Instead, it emerged through the gradual convergence of evidence that became increasingly difficult to ignore. By this stage, detectives had already spent countless hours examining every available lead. They had studied the crime scene. They had interviewed witnesses. They had reconstructed timelines. They had analyzed forensic findings. Most importantly, they had recovered the contents of the damaged digital camera found inside the washing machine. That camera was no longer merely a piece of evidence. It was becoming the silent witness at the center of the entire case. When forensic specialists successfully extracted photographs from the memory card, investigators gained access to something extraordinarily valuable: time. In homicide investigations, time often represents the difference between certainty and speculation. A photograph captures a moment. Multiple photographs capture a sequence. A sequence creates a timeline. And a timeline exposes inconsistencies. The recovered images documented Travis Alexander alive on the day he was killed. They also documented the presence of another person. For detectives, this discovery fundamentally changed the investigation. Until then, many questions remained open. Afterward, the circle began closing rapidly. The photographs established proximity, opportunity, presence. Facts that could not easily be explained away. Yet the images represented only one part of the breakthrough. The true significance emerged when investigators compared them against statements that had already been provided. The contradiction was impossible to ignore. A person who claimed not to have been present was now connected to visual evidence placing them at the scene. That discrepancy forced investigators to ask a crucial question. If the original story was false, what else might be false? Experienced detectives understand that lies often create additional lies. A fabricated explanation rarely survives contact with evidence. Instead, it requires modification. Then further modification. Eventually the story becomes so complicated that maintaining consistency becomes nearly impossible. That pattern appeared to be unfolding here. The first version of events collapsed under scrutiny. Then a second version emerged. Then a third. Each revision created new problems. Each revision increased investigative attention. Meanwhile, forensic findings continued accumulating. Detectives examined the sequence of events leading up to the killing. They examined travel patterns, vehicle movements, communication records. Every available detail was scrutinized. The more evidence they gathered, the more investigators began to believe they were observing signs of preparation rather than coincidence. Certain decisions appeared deliberate. Certain actions appeared purposeful. Certain circumstances seemed increasingly difficult to explain as spontaneous. The significance of these findings cannot be overstated. In many homicide cases, determining whether a killing was planned or impulsive becomes one of the central legal battles. A spontaneous act and a premeditated act may result in the same tragic outcome, but the legal implications differ dramatically. Prosecutors therefore focused intensely on evidence that could illuminate intent. Intent is invisible. No investigator can directly observe another person's thoughts. The mind leaves no fingerprints, no DNA, no photographs. Intent must be inferred through behavior. Actions become evidence of planning. Choices become evidence of purpose. Patterns become evidence of motive. As detectives assembled the timeline surrounding June 2008, they increasingly believed those patterns were becoming visible. The breakthrough was not simply identifying a suspect. That stage had largely passed. The breakthrough involved constructing a coherent explanation supported by physical evidence. An explanation capable of surviving courtroom scrutiny. One challenge remained particularly important: the defense narrative. Any successful prosecution would need to address alternative explanations. When claims of self-defense eventually emerged, investigators revisited the evidence once again. Every injury, every photograph, every forensic detail, every timeline entry. The question became whether the physical evidence supported the claim. Prosecutors believed it did not. Instead, they argued the evidence pointed in a different direction entirely. The brutality of the attack became central to their interpretation. Investigators examined the number of injuries, the severity of the wounds, the overall circumstances surrounding the killing. Taken together, they believed these elements supported a conclusion of intentional homicide rather than defensive action. Of course, investigations are not conducted in isolation. As information leaked into public awareness, interest in the case continued growing. People became fascinated by the unusual nature of the evidence. The recovered photographs attracted enormous attention. The changing stories attracted even more. Media outlets began recognizing the case as something larger than a routine homicide investigation. It possessed all the elements capable of capturing national interest. A complicated relationship. A brutal killing. Conflicting explanations. Striking forensic evidence. Psychological intrigue. Every new development seemed to deepen public fascination. Yet inside investigative offices, detectives remained focused on a simpler objective: build the strongest possible case. Emotion could not replace evidence. Public opinion could not replace evidence. Speculation could not replace evidence. Only facts mattered. And the facts were increasingly aligning. One of the most revealing aspects of the breakthrough phase involved the way independent pieces of evidence reinforced one another. The photographs supported the timeline. The timeline supported witness accounts. Witness accounts supported investigative theories. Travel records supported presence. Presence supported opportunity. Individually, each element possessed value. Together, they became extraordinarily powerful. The case was evolving from suspicion into proof. For detectives, this transformation represented months of work finally paying off. Homicide investigations rarely unfold like television dramas. There is no single moment when everything suddenly becomes clear. Instead, clarity arrives gradually. A report confirms a theory. An interview strengthens a timeline. A forensic result eliminates an alternative explanation. Confidence grows piece by piece. That process was now reaching its conclusion. Investigators believed they had reconstructed the essential events surrounding Travis Alexander's death. They believed they understood who had been present. They believed they understood why certain actions had occurred afterward. Most importantly, they believed they could demonstrate these conclusions using evidence rather than speculation. As prosecutors prepared to move forward, another transformation occurred. The case ceased being solely an investigation. It became a prosecution. The focus shifted. Detectives had spent months asking questions. Attorneys would soon spend years answering challenges. Every conclusion would be attacked. Every witness would be scrutinized. Every inconsistency would be examined. That is the nature of the justice system. Evidence is not accepted automatically. It must withstand examination. The stronger the case, the stronger the challenge often becomes. Prosecutors understood that the upcoming courtroom battle would be difficult. The defense possessed its own narrative, its own interpretation, its own explanations. Jurors would eventually decide which version appeared more credible. But before that battle could begin, investigators reached a final realization. The breakthrough they had been searching for was complete. The mystery that had begun inside a silent house in Mesa was no longer defined by uncertainty. The evidence had provided direction. The camera had provided chronology. The contradictions had provided insight. The forensic findings had provided context. Together, they formed a story. A story prosecutors believed pointed clearly toward responsibility. For the family of Travis Alexander, however, the breakthrough carried a different meaning. Evidence could explain how. It could suggest why. It could identify who. But it could never restore what had been lost. No forensic discovery could bring Travis back. No investigative success could erase grief. Justice and healing are not the same thing. One may contribute to the other. Neither guarantees it. As investigators prepared their findings for court, the emotional weight of the case remained present. A young man's life had ended. A family continued mourning. Friends continued searching for understanding. The legal process offered accountability. It could not offer restoration. Still, accountability mattered. Truth mattered. And after months of uncertainty, investigators believed they had finally uncovered enough truth to move forward. The breakthrough had arrived. The evidence was assembled. The case was ready. Now the spotlight would shift from detectives to attorneys, from investigation rooms to a courtroom, from forensic reports to sworn testimony. The next chapter would determine whether the evidence that convinced investigators could also convince a jury. And in that courtroom, under the scrutiny of cameras and public attention, one of the most famous true crime trials of the modern era was about to begin. By the time the murder trial finally began, years had passed since the death of Travis Alexander. Years filled with investigations. Years filled with legal preparation. Years filled with unanswered questions and painful memories. For the Alexander family, the passage of time had not erased grief. It had merely changed its shape. The shock that followed the discovery of Travis's body had gradually transformed into something heavier and more permanent. Every birthday missed. Every holiday marked by absence. Every family gathering that included an empty space where he should have been. The trial promised something many people desperately wanted. Answers. Justice. Closure. Yet courtrooms rarely provide closure in the way people imagine. They provide facts. Arguments. Evidence. Verdicts. But grief rarely ends when a judge enters a sentence. As attorneys prepared to present their cases, public attention surrounding the trial continued growing. What had once been a homicide investigation in Arizona was becoming a national spectacle. Television cameras followed developments closely. Legal commentators analyzed evidence. Journalists filled articles with updates and interpretations. Millions of people who had never met Travis Alexander suddenly found themselves fascinated by the case. Some followed the evidence. Others focused on the psychology of the accused. Many became consumed by the complicated relationship at the center of the tragedy. The trial possessed all the ingredients capable of capturing public attention. Violence. Sex. Religion. Jealousy. Conflicting stories. Human drama. The result was extraordinary media interest. Yet beneath the attention and controversy remained a simple reality. A man had lost his life. A family wanted accountability. And a jury would ultimately decide whether the prosecution had proven its case. When proceedings began, the courtroom became the stage upon which years of investigative work would be tested. Every photograph. Every forensic report. Every witness statement. Every contradiction. All of it would now be examined under intense scrutiny. The prosecution entered the courtroom with a clear narrative. According to their theory, the murder of Travis Alexander was not an act of spontaneous self-defense. It was a deliberate killing. A crime motivated by emotional conflict, jealousy, and a deteriorating relationship. Their task was straightforward in principle but difficult in practice. Convince 12 jurors beyond a reasonable doubt. To accomplish that goal, Prosecutors methodically presented evidence accumulated during years of investigation. The recovered camera became a central element. Jurors were shown how photographs helped establish a timeline. How those images documented moments shortly before the killing. How they placed individuals inside the home during crucial periods. The photographs carried unusual power. Unlike testimony, photographs do not forget. Unlike memories, photographs do not evolve over time. They capture moments exactly as they existed when the shutter clicked. For prosecutors, this made them extraordinarily persuasive. But the photographs represented only part of the case. Forensic evidence followed. Investigators described the crime scene. Medical experts discussed injuries. Analysts explained physical findings. Each witness added another layer to the prosecution's narrative. One piece of evidence reinforced another. One conclusion supported the next. Gradually, prosecutors attempted to build a picture they believed was impossible to ignore. Yet every trial contains two sides. The defense faced an enormous challenge. The physical evidence was substantial. The changing statements presented difficulties. The brutality of the crime complicated efforts to create reasonable doubt. Still, defense attorneys had a responsibility. Present an alternative explanation. Challenge assumptions. Question conclusions. Advocate for their client. Their strategy centered heavily upon claims of self-defense. According to the defense perspective, events inside the house had unfolded differently from what prosecutors alleged. The killing, they argued, occurred within a context of fear and perceived danger. Jurors therefore faced a difficult task. Not determining whether Travis Alexander had been killed. That fact was undisputed. Instead, they needed to determine why. Intent became the battlefield. Motivation became the battlefield. Credibility became the battlefield. And no issue generated more discussion than the statements provided by Jodi Arias herself. Throughout the investigation, her explanations had changed repeatedly. Initially, she denied involvement. Later, she claimed unknown intruders were responsible. Eventually, she admitted killing Travis while asserting self-defense. Prosecutors focused intensely on these contradictions. To them, the shifting narratives suggested consciousness of guilt. Truth, they argued, does not require constant revision. Defense attorneys offered different interpretations. They emphasized emotional trauma, fear, psychological complexity. The jury was left to decide which explanation appeared more credible. As testimony continued, the trial became increasingly dramatic. Witness after witness entered the courtroom. Experts presented findings. Attorneys challenged conclusions. The process unfolded over weeks and months. What had once existed only within investigative files now became public record. Millions watched. Millions debated. Millions formed opinions. The courtroom transformed into a national conversation. Every facial expression attracted attention. Every answer generated analysis. Every contradiction fueled discussion. Few criminal trials in recent memory had attracted such intense public fascination. Part of the reason involved the personalities at the center of the story. Part involved the brutality of the crime. Part involved the psychological questions surrounding the relationship. People wanted to understand. How could a relationship evolve into such violence? What warning signs had existed? Could the tragedy have been prevented? These questions extended beyond legal guilt. They touched something deeper. They forced people to examine the darker possibilities hidden within human relationships. As proceedings moved forward, one witness remained impossible to ignore. Jodi Arias herself. When defendants testify, they place themselves directly before the jury. The decision carries enormous risk. Jurors gain an opportunity to hear explanations firsthand. They also gain an opportunity to evaluate credibility directly. Throughout her testimony, Arias provided her account of events. She described the relationship. She described her perceptions. She described the circumstances surrounding the killing. For supporters, her testimony offered context. For critics, it raised additional questions. Reactions varied dramatically. Some observers found aspects of her explanations persuasive. Others found them impossible to believe. Public opinion became sharply divided. Yet public opinion held no legal authority. Only the jury mattered. Only their interpretation of the evidence would determine the outcome. As closing arguments approached, both sides understood the significance of the moment. Years of work had led here. Investigators had gathered evidence. Experts had analyzed findings. Attorneys had constructed narratives. Now everything depended upon deliberation. The prosecution argued that evidence overwhelmingly demonstrated premeditated murder. They pointed toward the timeline, the photographs, the contradictions, the forensic findings. Together, they argued, these elements established deliberate intent. The defense urged jurors to consider alternative interpretations. They emphasized uncertainty, emotional complexity, questions surrounding what occurred during the fatal confrontation. The jury received instructions and retired to deliberate. Then came the waiting. Waiting is often the most difficult stage of any trial. Attorneys can no longer argue. Witnesses can no longer testify. Evidence can no longer be introduced. Control disappears. Everything rests in the hands of strangers tasked with making one of the most important decisions of their lives. For the Alexander family, those hours carried immense emotional weight. For prosecutors, years of work hung in the balance. For the defendant, the future itself depended upon the outcome. Eventually, the jury returned. The courtroom filled with anticipation. Every person present understood the significance of what was about to happen. When the verdict was announced, years of uncertainty reached a decisive conclusion. Jodi Arias was found guilty of first-degree murder. The jury rejected the claim that the killing had been justified self-defense. For prosecutors, the verdict represented validation of the evidence they had presented. For the Alexander family, it represented accountability. Not healing. Not closure. But accountability. A legal acknowledgement that Travis Alexander's death had not been an accident or a justified act. It had been murder. Yet even after the verdict, the legal process was not entirely complete. Attention shifted toward punishment. Because in cases involving first-degree murder, determining guilt represents only part of the journey. The question of sentencing remained. Debate intensified regarding whether Arias should receive the death penalty. The issue divided observers. Some believed execution was appropriate given the brutality of the crime. Others opposed capital punishment under any circumstances. The legal process surrounding sentencing became lengthy and complicated. Multiple proceedings followed. Jurors struggled to reach unanimous decisions regarding capital punishment. The case continued generating headlines. Continued generating debate. Continued generating controversy. Eventually, after years of legal proceedings, a final outcome emerged. Rather than receiving a death sentence, Jodi Arias was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of release. The sentence ensured she would spend the remainder of her life behind bars. For the justice system, the case had reached its conclusion. For the families involved, however, consequences would continue indefinitely. One family would visit a grave. Another family would visit a prison. No verdict could change those realities. No sentence could reverse history. The courtroom had delivered its judgment. The law had spoken. The evidence had prevailed. Yet as spectators exited the courthouse and cameras packed away their equipment, a deeper question lingered. What lessons should be taken from a tragedy like this? Because while the trial had answered who was responsible, it had not fully answered why such destruction became possible in the first place. That question would continue echoing long after the verdict. Long after the headlines faded. Long after the courtroom doors finally closed. When a criminal case ends in court, there is a common assumption that everything else ends as well. The investigation is over. The trial is complete. The verdict has been delivered. The sentence has been imposed. In theory, the story should conclude at that moment. In reality, it rarely does. For those directly affected by the death of Travis Alexander, the courtroom verdict marked not an ending, but a permanent shift into a new reality shaped by absence. Life after murder does not return to what it was before. It becomes something entirely different. A life divided into before and after. Before the phone stopped ringing. Before the silence in the house. Before the discovery that changed everything. And after. The Alexander family had to learn how to exist in a world where Travis no longer had a place in it. His absence was not abstract. It was present in daily routines. In conversations that no longer included him. In birthdays that would never again be shared. In holidays marked by a missing voice. Grief does not move in a straight line. It returns unexpectedly. It appears in ordinary moments. A photograph. A familiar place. A memory triggered by something small and unimportant to others. For family and friends, the passage of time does not erase loss. It reshapes it. The legal system had done its work. A jury had spoken. A sentence had been issued. But justice, in its legal form, does not equal emotional resolution. It provides accountability. It does not provide restoration. Meanwhile, the person at the center of the conviction entered a different reality. A life defined not by freedom, but by confinement. Inside prison walls, time moves differently. Days are structured. Routines are controlled. Choices are limited. The outside world continues to evolve, but access to it becomes distant and filtered. Public fascination with the case did not disappear after the verdict. In fact, in many ways, it intensified. True crime communities examined every detail. Documentaries revisited the evidence. Online discussions debated motives, psychology, and interpretations of events. The case became part of a broader cultural conversation about relationships, violence, and the complexity of human behavior. People were drawn to it not only because of its brutality, but because of its ambiguity. It forced uncomfortable questions. How do relationships deteriorate to the point of irreversible violence? What warning signs are missed? How does perception differ so dramatically between two people describing the same relationship? And perhaps most disturbingly, how can ordinary life continue alongside extraordinary tragedy? The case of Travis Alexander became a reference point in discussions about domestic violence and intimate partner conflict. It highlighted how relationships can contain layers that remain invisible to outsiders. It demonstrated how emotional intensity can mask instability. It showed how narratives can diverge so dramatically depending on perspective. Yet even as the case entered public discourse, the most important perspective often remained the most overlooked. The perspective of the victim as a person, not a case file. Travis Alexander was remembered by those who knew him not as evidence in a courtroom, but as a friend, a brother, a son, a man with ambitions and flaws and relationships and dreams that were never fully realized. In the years following the trial, his memory continued to exist in the lives of those who loved him. They spoke about him. They remembered him. They carried his absence forward in ways both visible and invisible. For them, the story was never about legal arguments or courtroom strategies. It was about loss. Irreversible loss. One of the most difficult aspects of true crime cases is the way public attention can sometimes transform real human lives into narratives. Stories are consumed, discussed, debated, analyzed. But behind every story are real people who do not have the option of stepping away once interest fades. They live with the consequences every day. They carry memories that do not fade when headlines change. As years passed, the case remained part of public memory. Occasional updates would surface. Discussions would resurface online. New audiences would discover the story and revisit old evidence. Yet for those closest to the tragedy, time did not operate in the same way. The date of June 4, 2008, remained permanently fixed in memory, a point from which everything else was measured. The house in Mesa, Arizona, became part of criminal history, a location associated with one of the most widely discussed homicide investigations in recent decades. Yet beyond its association with crime, it also represented something quieter and more personal. A place where an ordinary day ended in irreversible loss. The final outcome of the case provided legal closure but not emotional completion. The justice system had fulfilled its role by determining guilt and imposing punishment. But justice in the legal sense is limited. It cannot undo events. It cannot restore life. It cannot return what has been taken. What remains instead is memory. And memory is shaped by those who carry it. Over time, public interest in the case shifted from immediate reaction to long-term analysis. People studied the psychology of relationships, the dynamics of attachment and conflict, the role of communication breakdown, the impact of emotional dependency, the dangers of unresolved tension. The case became a subject of broader reflection about how violence can emerge within intimate relationships rather than from external threats. It forced conversations about emotional health, about boundaries, about perception versus reality, about the difference between love and control. But even these discussions, while meaningful, could not capture the full human cost. No analysis can fully represent the experience of losing someone suddenly. No theory can fully explain the silence left behind. No courtroom verdict can fully measure absence. For Travis Alexander, life ended long before any public understanding of what had occurred. For those who loved him, life continued in a changed form. And for the world watching the case unfold, it became a story of justice, evidence, and controversy. 3 different perspectives on the same reality, each incomplete in its own way. As the years continued, the case gradually settled into its place within true crime history. Not forgotten. Not resolved in an emotional sense. But documented. Examined. Remembered. And discussed. It became part of a larger archive of cases that illustrate both the capabilities and limitations of the justice system. It showed how investigative work can uncover truth. How forensic science can reconstruct events. How courts can determine responsibility. But it also revealed something more difficult. That even when truth is established in a legal sense, human understanding of tragedy remains incomplete. There is always something beyond the reach of evidence. Something beyond the reach of testimony. Something beyond the reach of verdicts. That something is lived experience. The private reality of those who are no longer here. And those who remain. In the end, the story of Travis Alexander and Jodi Arias is not only a case file or a trial record. It is a reminder of how fragile human connections can be. How quickly ordinary life can change. And how some moments, once they occur, cannot be undone. The courtroom has closed. The investigation has ended. The sentence has been served. But the story, in the way it matters most to those affected, continues in memory. In absence. And in the quiet spaces left behind when a life is taken too soon. When a story like this reaches its final stage, there is a temptation to believe that everything meaningful has already been said. The investigation has been completed. The trial has ended. The verdict has been delivered. The sentence has been imposed. From a legal perspective, the system considers the matter resolved. But human understanding does not operate on the same timeline as the law. Long after the courtroom doors close, questions continue to linger in the minds of those who encounter the case for the first time. Not questions about evidence or procedure, but questions about people. How does a relationship reach a point where it no longer contains safety? How do emotions shift from connection to conflict? How do moments that once felt ordinary become the foundation of irreversible consequences? The case of Travis Alexander and Jodi Arias continues to be revisited not because it is the only violent crime of its kind, but because it reflects patterns that are disturbingly familiar. Relationships are complex systems of trust, expectation, vulnerability, and perception. When those systems function, they create intimacy and stability. When they fail, the breakdown is often gradual rather than sudden. Miscommunication replaces understanding. Emotional distance replaces closeness. Resentment replaces patience. And in rare but devastating cases, emotional collapse can escalate into violence. What makes this case particularly difficult to process is not only the brutality of the outcome, but the contrast between the beginning and the end. At its origin, the relationship appeared ordinary. Two people meeting. Attraction forming. Communication developing. A familiar human pattern repeated countless times in countless lives. There was no visible indication that this connection would eventually become part of criminal history. And yet it did. This is one of the most uncomfortable truths contained within many true crime cases. Danger is rarely obvious at the beginning. It is often revealed only in hindsight. By the time warning signs are fully understood, the outcome has already occurred. For investigators, the case represented a successful example of forensic and investigative coordination. Evidence was collected. Timelines were reconstructed. Conflicting accounts were analyzed. Physical proof ultimately guided the legal outcome. For the justice system, it resulted in accountability. A conviction. A sentence. A formal recognition of responsibility under law. But for those seeking emotional resolution, the outcome is more complicated. Justice does not reverse time. It does not restore relationships. It does not erase trauma. It does not answer every emotional question. It simply defines legal responsibility. Outside the courtroom, the story continued to evolve in public memory. The case became widely discussed in documentaries, articles, podcasts, and online communities dedicated to true crime analysis. People revisited the evidence repeatedly, attempting to understand how each piece fit together. The recovered photographs. The timeline of events. The changing statements. The forensic findings. Each element became part of a larger attempt to interpret human behavior under extreme circumstances. Some focused on psychology. Some focused on evidence. Some focused on legal interpretation. Others focused on broader themes such as relationships, trust, and emotional instability. But no matter how many times the case is examined, it resists simple conclusions. It remains layered, complex, multifaceted. The story does not offer a single lesson. Instead, it offers multiple reflections depending on where attention is directed. For the family of Travis Alexander, the passage of time has not reduced the significance of what was lost. It has only changed the way that loss is carried. Grief does not disappear through explanation. It becomes part of memory, part of identity, part of life moving forward without someone who should have remained part of it. For those who knew him personally, he is not defined by the case that made his name known to the world. He is defined by relationships, experiences, conversations, and moments that existed long before any investigation began. For them, he remains a person rather than a narrative. For the legal system, the case represents closure in procedural terms. A completed investigation. A concluded trial. A final sentence. But closure in law is not the same as closure in life. Life continues after verdicts. Time continues after sentencing. Memory continues after headlines fade. And the consequences of violence continue long after the moment it occurs. As for the broader public, cases like this often serve as reminders of uncomfortable realities. That relationships can be unpredictable. That emotional conflict can escalate in ways that are not always visible from the outside. That human behavior cannot always be neatly categorized or easily predicted. And that behind every case file is a real life that cannot be restored. In the end, the story of Travis Alexander is not only about a crime. It is about absence. The absence of a future that was never allowed to unfold. The absence of conversations that never happened. The absence of experiences that were never lived. And it is also about the limits of understanding. No investigation, no trial, and no amount of public discussion can fully capture the totality of what was lost. What remains is memory, evidence, and the enduring reminder that every life exists beyond the moment it becomes a case. And long after the world moves on, that is what remains most difficult to accept. That some stories do not end with answers. They end with absence.